He's tough, he's intimidating, difficult. Calamity defined what a JRPG boss is to me, and for that, he's got to get the S tier. Hey Xenogears fans, back with another one here, and this time I'm going to do that tried and true tier list. One of the things I absolutely love about Xenogears are the mechs, well, gears in this case. I'm a huge fan of sci-fi, and I love seeing mech combat. But instead of focusing on the player-controlled gears, I decided to make a list about the enemy gear boss encounters, and some unique events. I'm planning to do a separate list later of the on-foot battles. So, onto this list, I've got a few arbitrary criteria I'll use to rank each encounter, and we'll go ahead and just dump right in. Alright, so to start, our first boss fight in the game, the Renkar in Blackmoon Forest, encountered after our fateful meeting with Ellie. I love the way this boss fight is set up. As a kid, the first time playing this was like, holy crap, this is insane. It's like the first boss fight in the game. We're facing down what is basically a T-Rex with our bare hands. And what's even more awesome is that if you have the Raijin, which you almost certainly will by this point, you can knock this beast down, which is just awesome to see. Very Star Wars, the old Renkar. A little bit like our old friend Rico. But anyway, the scene is really smoothly set up, and I love how it just transitions from this dramatic scene with Ellie and Faye into this huge lizard monster you're fighting. Like I said, the first time I saw this, I was like, holy crap, we got an insane challenge on our hands. One of the cool things I really like about this boss fight is that it's one of the few fights in the game, if not the only boss fight in the game, where it's dynamic. You start the fight off on foot, and then you go into your gear later as Doc brings it to you. I think that's a really cool element of the fight. You know, things were getting desperate. You really don't have a way to beat this thing, and, you know, just out of nowhere you get that nice, extremely cinematic Doc comes in, hey, let's get this thing done. And that is really cool. Now, the one thing about this boss fight I would say is that from a gameplay perspective, he's fairly easy, so it doesn't really stick with you in the same way that some other boss fights will, like Red Rum. But overall, very solid, you know, first boss. Very tense situation and whatnot, especially the first time you go through it. But, like I said, the gameplay-wise, it's not that engaging, actually. You kind of forget about the Renkar after this initial meeting, but very good for shock value. Anyway, so on the tier list, we're going to give this fight a good, solid, you know, B plus A. It earns a little bit of a boost just because of the cinematic aspect and the unique setup of the fight. Next up is the Worm. Summoned by Graf after your initial conversation. The fight is set right after a whole bunch of questions arise within the player at the introduction of this obvious new villain. Within the orange moon at the background, the setup is awesome for this fight. Now the boss looks a lot like one of the Grabloids from the 90s Tremors movies, if you've ever seen those. I view this fight as almost a tutorial fight, as the boss does pretty pitiful damage, really just slurping away fuel. I guess it creates some tension, but if you're attacking on each turn, it's basically impossible to lose. Even if you just use guided shot, you'll still win. For this boss, I give him a rank of D. Graf is what really draws the attention in this, not this jobber. He's easy, and he's forgettable. Fortunately, the next two fights are the exact opposite of Worm. Right after one of my favorite sections in the game, the Eva Sound Cruiser, you get attacked by a young, brash pirate, Bart, riding the Brigandier. As I said, I love the whole dynamic sequence of the sand ship, and on the whole, it leads naturally and smoothly right into the fight. I also love the design of the Brigandier itself, decked out in what I imagine to be like Ferrari red with sand hover legs, an eye patch with the extendable whips. This gear is badass. The encounter itself is also fun, but brief. Bart gets the first turn and immediately hits Faye with the Wild Smile, a devastating status ailment. You suddenly can't hit and you're getting pinged by everything. This is the first enemy in the game who can use the status effect on you. Well, aside from the Renkar anyway. I love the fact that as soon as you face off against Bart, it becomes rapidly apparent it's going to be like a hard fight to win. If you've been using the booster, you're probably at about half fuel and just starting to get nervous as the fight ends when the sand disappears beneath both gears' feet and they're thrust into the stalactite cavern. Great cinematic boss fight that nets you a permanent party member and a game-long friend. This one gets an S for me. Next one is also a banger, as after your meeting with Old Man Bal, you come up against the mighty Calamity. I love thick boy gear designs, and this is the pinnacle of that. He shows up like the damn Terminator. He can't be bargained with, he can't be reasoned with. He doesn't feel pity, or pain, or remorse, or fear. And he absolutely will not stop until you are dead. Seriously, as a kid, this guy was so damn difficult. I had no idea how to get past him. He just kicked my ass over and over and over until I went to the Borders Books and Music and actually bought a strategy guide where I learned the concept of grinding. The guide said you had to be at least level 23 to win the fight. So when I went and got the levels, I still lost, so I grinded a level 25 and managed to win. Of course, as has been pointed out by a few people, that Brady Games guide is completely wrong about a lot of things, including that. But I didn't know at the time. Turns out with the right tactics, good use of the wild smile, and popping off your level 1 death blows, you can comfortably beat Calamity at level 17. He's tough, he's intimidating, difficult. Calamity defined what a JRPG boss is to me, and for that, he's got to get the S tier. The next series of fights are the 3 Gebler goons when they attack the pirate's lair. So overall for these encounters, I really love the setup. These guys use a slick first-person perspective to give them a sense of elite operatives infiltrating the lair and setting off all hell with their surprise attack. These guys are all shown to be somewhat ruthless, and their individual gear designs are varied, so that's somewhat cool. Now, when it gets down to each individual fight though, these are all about the same. Pretty easy enemies with little to no variance. They all get taken out with pretty minimal effort. So for all these guys, I give them a C. Halfway decent designs, but nothing really special. Well, I do like the Sword Knight and Aegis Knight designs, so let's give those two a B. Next up is Shapiro. Capping off some of the Goon Squad is the showdown with Shapiro, which, by the way, if you didn't know, was one of the many Solaris gears designed by the Doc himself. Ain't he a stinker? Anyway, this fight is the first time you'll have to use your full party in any encounter in the game. And you'll need it because this guy has over 6,000 hit points. As a kid, this fight was a bit challenging since your damage from the previous fights carried over, and he hits pretty damn hard. That is, of course, unless you use Wild Smile, which trivializes the fight. Weird design, but half decent boss at the end of a gauntlet, so let's give him a B. And with that, we won't have another gear boss fight till the end of the first Eva arc, which just happens to be the exact same jobbers. So this time the stakes are a little bit higher, as you need to take out all these guys in one continuous gauntlet, with Ellie and her Verge being the last fight. But they're pretty easy to do, especially with the right loadout. There's several winning configurations, but in any case, these guys usually don't pose too much of a threat. Again, a pretty slick setup as Ellie is in the background wrestling with her emotions and ultimately takes the drive in order to force herself to fight Faye. Side note, this might be one of the first instances in a video game ever that I saw where they reference blatant drug use. The fight with the junkie Ellie is epic and dramatic as she unleashes the funnel air rod attack. Plus, seeing the very feminine, slender Verge and its power with Ellie as well is really awesome, a unique design that I hadn't seen up to that point. The jobbers beforehand get a C, but Ella elevates the whole boss encounter to an S. Definitely one of the most memorable fights in the game. Directly after the fight with Ellie and her group, we have another really great boss sequence, where Faye first dives into the Chakan forces on the Eva border to create a distraction. I absolutely love the way this whole sequence is set up. If there was ever a remake in AAA quality, this sequence would be incredibly fun to see. Regardless, hopping onto the deck of the main gunship after picking your way through the screen of gears and anti-gear fire is really cool. Taking out the miniguns, you're going right for the big gun as it readies its huge cannon shot with the music flowing. Everything just creates a really well done fight. In the grand scheme, this fight is not super memorable, but I think that's only because the next is super memorable. So on the tier list, I give the whole gunship and sequence a solid A. The next fight, the Dora. This is a badass fight. It's an extremely memorable villain, despite the fact he doesn't have many lines or appear very often in the game. In fact, many people in the Xenogears fan group often mistake Vandercum with Chakan, who fights you much later in the game. Hard to blame anyone though, his character design with that striking purple cross is extremely memorable. So the Dora itself, the machine tank gear monstrosity, represents an intimidating foe. This is underscored by the fact that for the only fight in the game, the player is joined by generic assistants from Bart's pirate crew, Matria and gang. They do 0 damage to the Dora. Well, at least at first. In fact, the Dora picks these guys up off their feet and bashes them against the well tower or each other for huge damage. Breaking the heavily armored head reveals a massive gun, and the Dora is able to shoot you as well, not taking an extra turn to do so. Everything about this fight is cinematic. The setup is great as the boss Steel Beast rises from the gunship. The fight is hardly it's just full of tension, and victory is not a sure thing. Also, of course, you have to mention Graf shows up, showing an incredible presence and using his first guru potential unlock sequence where he raises his hand and makes that old English style speech and unlocks the power in Vandercum, triggering Matria and his crew attempting to sacrifice themselves to give Faye a chance to go and help Bart, as things have obviously gone wrong. But this triggers Faye to unintentionally succumb to id, and it sets up the awesome climax for the first arc of the game. This fight, the whole encounter, everything, easily S tier. Before the player sees the results of the powered-up Vandercum, the action cuts to Bart on the brigandier piloting the Yggdrasil. Suddenly, an unknown opponent shows up and just decimates everything, flying into the fight, and then challenges Bart, saying, "Are you strong?" I mean, I'd be shitting bricks, let me tell you. And to make matters worse, Ramses shows up with the Wyvern and Ming, and is beaten so quickly and so completely, you just know Bart is like, oh my god, look at this monster. So he engages in the futile struggle against id, which he quickly just dispatches the Brigandier, and that is actually the first enforced loss for the player in the game. And next, you have one of the most iconic scenes in Xenogears just play out. It is awesome to behold. this moves the game to the Kislev arc. And man, what a way to close out that first part of the game. I know this section is more playable cutscene than real boss encounter, but nonetheless, this whole sequence is one of the most impactful there is. As I said, a great climax to the Eva scene. This thing gets another S. Now from here, we won't have another normal boss fight in the gear for quite some time, but I'll briefly touch on the battle section, the battle arena, that I found to be really awesome. What a refreshing and awesome change of pace. I love that Square took the time to develop and show this section of the game where the gears are in kind of a live combat sequence. You get a sense for how fast they are, how large they are, the movesets they have. It's awesome that Squaresoft took the time to put in the mini mode, and really the fights in here can be just as compelling depending on your skill level as the regular turn-based engine. So well done, and just wanted to highlight that awesome team, that talented group that Squaresoft had in its heyday. So our next normal encounter is against another Renkar, just as Rico is about to be executed. Still getting those very strong Return of the Jedi vibes here, but we'll let it pass. Pretty much the same fight, except your opponent has a bit more health and does a bit more damage. Easily dispatched and hardly memorable. A D grade for the Renkar R. Next up, we have what I call the Kislev Gear Gauntlet. Once again, and for the final time, the Gebler goon squad show up with Dominia, and at the end of the charge. This fight actually caused me a tremendous amount of pain and heartache as a kid. So I went into this fight and lost repeatedly, having learned the false lesson that the stalactite caves taught me. I figured it was just too low of a level to take the whole gear gauntlet on. I just kept running out of life all the way through. Plus, even though I had the guide, I just refused to use it since I wanted to play the game with a minimal amount of spoilers. So I went back into those maintenance tunnels with the vents and grinded with Faye and Doc. Grinded levels all the way from, I think the recommended level is like 30 something to 54. And this was in the 90s. No podcast, no music, no monitor on the side, just hours and hours of grinding. After reaching that level, I went to the fight and lost again. So I was like, alright, that's enough. I broke open the guide and wait, what's this? In upgrade gear? But where? It's some SOB bouncing away in the background against a series of other gears that look just like him. I never saw him. I missed him. And oh my gosh, what an incredible ordeal. Anyway though, if you get the upgrades to the Weltall, including the frame HP restore, this is a pretty easy sequence. They do a bit more damage, have a bit more life, but they don't have any new attacks, no new coordination. It's not too bad. So, even though this took forever and a day, it was really more due to my own ineptitude. Hence, these guys earn a C. The Ship Bomb Hecht. You come to Dominia after all that, piloting the Ship Bomb Hecht, who has a gear built into it, which is kind of cool actually. Interesting trivia is that Dominia is about to bomb Kislev, which contains the only other native of Elru, Kaiser Sigmund. Pretty twisted if Solaris knew about that, but whatever. Anyway, her fight's not too hard, as everything really is around the fight to kind of build up the reunion between Faye and Ellie. There's a really cool backdrop of the story, you know, as the Hecht is getting ready to crash into the city and everyone's doing everything that they can. There's really especially an awesome scene where Graf swoops in with his Omni gear and protects Ellie from the explosion with one of his wings. That's a cool look, no doubt about it. But really this whole boss fight, it really didn't have to be Dominia. I get that it establishes her as a credible villain, but you know, I think the fight doesn't add as much to it. So I will give her a B this time. Next up we have Fizz 6, or FIS 6. He is the boss at the end of the Goliath factory. There's not a whole lot to say about him actually. I like the gear design and somewhat with the angular hard tank features big shield, big sword, but there's nothing really striking here. And this is one of the few times in the game where the boss seems like sort of an obligated boss at the end of a dungeon. Not a unique setup or build-up, he just happens to be there. He's pretty forgettable as well, so Phys 6 gets the D. About 5 minutes after that, though, we're going to be riding the Goliath and get another much more compelling fight. Whilst riding the Goliath, our known nemesis Graf shows up and takes the party on. Not with his Alpha Weltall, but with these hands. Fun fact, we never see this version of Alpha Weltall in any fight in the game. This is such an awesome fight because as soon as you get out there with Faye and squad, you realize you're not going to be taking him and the gear on, you're just taking on Graf. It's like he doesn't even think your team is strong enough to warrant him using the gear. And he's right, because he'll hit Weltall and steer harder than anything the game has thrown at you at this point. He'll take multiple turns to every turn you take. It's quite easy to lose this fight. And you'll probably notice that Graf does not attack Ellie. Although I've heard there's some Game Shark code you can enter that will trigger him to attack her, but I've never seen it. Regardless of the outcome of the fight, quick thinking Doc tilts the plane and hilariously dumps Graf and his machine off the wings. Seeing Alpha Weltall skid off the edge is both funny and pretty satisfying. Somehow, despite the fact that he was separated from his gear, he manages to get on it in midair, presumably, and then is flying right towards you. Until Bart shoots down the Goliath with his patented Bart missile. An awesome boss fight. Really just emphasizes how tough an opponent Graf is going to be and brilliantly sets up the next section of the game. This fight earns an A+ low S. I'm just not sure where to put it, but it's awesome. So, you link back up with the Yggdrasil, and the players immediately thrust into the first underwater battle against the elements Dominia and Kelvina. As is usual, a great gear setup for this fight. I'm a Navy guy and a submarine guy, so any underwater mech is gonna immediately get some bonus points for me. The Haisho is just a really cool looking suit also, I think so anyway. Which, consequently, this is yet another gear designed by the Doc. So, this fight I feel would really look cool in a remake setting as well. Something that really kind of shows off the speed and agility of the Haisho in water. I get that they tried to do it with the way that it attacks and moves off screen and on screen, but I feel like it could be better translated with some just improved sequencing. And the fact that Ellie gets kidnapped straight away after the scene also makes the encounter really stick out. It's a pretty straightforward fight. I'm going to give this one B+ low A. Next up, we have Dominia in her preferred suit, the Blade Gash. Our third fight in a row with the mighty element. This time, it goes a little bit smoother. So, this, like all the rest of the element's gears, is designed by, of course, the Doc. The fight's not too hard. Well, we gotta applaud Dominia a little bit just for taking on an entire team solo. But really, this fight's nothing but a setup to get you into the next fight. The Haisho with Ramses and Miang. So, Dominia lures you below, and you're forced again to take it on with Ramses. This time the Haisho hits hard, and actually has a fairly tough opponent, especially if you lost a lot of HP versus the Blade Gash. The fight plays out pretty tense, as we can see that the obsession for Ramses beating Faye is really taking hold of him. The fight ends for Ramses with his first and one of his 2 wins against getting the better of Faye, we shall say. So he drowns the Weltall, effectively damaging it to a point where water leaks into the cockpit. Ellie reacts to the scene and straight out charge counterattacks this guy and blasts Ramses with the air rod or funnel attack, driving the Haisho away. A pretty tense fight that ends in a cinematic way. I like it a lot. This one is, I'm going to give the Blade Gash and Haisho together a solid A. So, our next fight is against the Giant Wells. We don't have Faye for the first time in a gear boss battle, and I always thought his intro was a bit awkward and kind of weird how he just sort of lopes out of the sea. It's kind of also strange that he wasn't detected on scanners earlier, but anyway. This fight doesn't have a... Well, let's see. This fight's not all that unique, but it does have the ridiculous and over-the-top orphanage Renamazu gear launch, so, it has to have credit for that. As far as the fight itself, it has a unique mechanic where the boss is hit with either it grows, which is kind of cool to see the boss get way larger. Attack power goes up, defensive power goes down. Easy fight regardless. Giant Wells will give him a B. Our next gear battle is against Alcanshell to close out the loop on the Ethos and Bishop Stone, who has turned himself into the Crimson Skull. Once again, we find ourselves without Faye, and worse than that, before the fight even starts, Graf swoops down and bestows the power onto him. I love every phase of this fight. I love how you can look at the boss from the viewing plane on the Yggdrasil. I like how you start the fight off and you can't even touch the guy. No matter what you want to do, you just whack that corrupt bishop. He's been such a bastard. As a kid, I definitely wasted way too many resources and fuel and whatnot. And that devastating seal attack he uses, oh my gosh. It's a really cool boss mechanic that I hadn't seen up to that point. As everything is looking extremely bleak, Jesse shows up with his new transformable gear, the Bluntline, and tells Billy to use it to get past Stone's barrier. Billy fires just as Sitten reveals that the ammo is the pilot itself. A baffling design. Who the hell would make a gear that uses a pilot as the dock? Anyway, Bishop Stone reveals the truth of Billy and Prim's mother Raquel and the murder that he hired the Wells to do. It just makes you hate that guy even more. Taking him down is truly satisfying, and I like his floating gear design. So this fight's gonna get an S rank. Towards the end of the brutal Babel Tower climb, we encounter Ramses and his Wyvern and Miang in her typical support role, the C1 Verge, by the way. I love the actual location of this fight, high in the clouds, right next to the massive mirror, the Gebler command ship bearing down on you. Overall, this is where Faye and the group get the revenge on Ramses though, because the player beats the absolute dog shit out of this guy. At only 5,000 hit points, he has less than Shapiro did all the way back at Pirate's Lair. Now he can hit hard, but he's dealt with extremely quickly. And yeah, you might have guessed, the doc also designed the Wyvern as well. It's a custom made suit for Ramses out of the best materials apparently. Not that it seems to help him very much. Well, the net fight for this one is a B. At least there's a save point. Turns out, fears are unfounded in this case. 17 here serves more as a minor bump in the road and really just kind of helps establish Maria and Shivat, sort of setting the tone. The fight is even easier than the one against Ramses, so, I'll give this one a C. Do really like the design of the Zybzen though. That, it really does look like a upgraded version of Calamity. The next set of fights are a rather slick sequence, the generator battles, where you can basically pick any one of your team bar Maria and send them to the 4 separate battles, and they're going to engage in one-on-one fights. I really like this whole sequence. The individual unique fights are awesome. No two are exactly the same, and there's an element of risk and the unknown about who will be best suited for what. And to their credit, depending on who you send to these fights, it can actually be pretty tough. I just barely scraped by the encounter that I sent Faye into. Overall, I really like these fights, and I wish the game had more of these kind of solo special ops type feel. I think it's really at its best with this, so I'm going to give these an S rank. Axen, or Acten? 18. An awesomely intimidating, tough-looking boss. Terrifying Axen is the Man Fusion gear. The tragedy of the Balthazar family plays out in the backdrop of this epic 2-stage fight. One where the gear shows is capable of immobilizing everything else except the Zybzen, and Maria's unsure right now. It's her father in there, she thinks. So Choo Choo hops in and joins the fray, in a hilarious but still pretty cool encounter. That music, you can't fault it. It helps all the time. This is followed by Maria getting it together, heading out to the collision of the thick boy gears. From a gameplay perspective, there's really no way to lose this fight, either of them. But the tragedy, the presentation, and the awesome looking accent makes this a high A, borderline S level encounter for me. It only loses out slightly because there's just not much happening from a gameplay perspective. Nonetheless, the story is awesome, and in an RPG, that's what really matters. Next on the list is the bald bastard himself, Chakan. Freshly equipped with Advari, your physical limiters removed. You think you're gonna roll in and wreck this guy? Nope. If you don't already know how to abuse the game's mechanics, or you don't have the Seal AR equipped, he is going to hit you guys hard. Make sure to save before this boss fight. I did not. He's got an unnamed monstrosity gear that draws juice from the gate to heal him as a counter move. He's also been enhanced by Graf already. He doesn't even take any turns to do his healing either. It's like a counter attack. His gear that looks very similar to Alcanshell, but it's a bit more fancy and a lot more dangerous. Effectively destroying the last remnants of the ethos with this fight, bringing the Fatima storyline to its conclusion is very satisfying and well earned. Plus, using the Infinity mode for the first time looks awesome. It creates a really cool sequence. And Chakan, beating him doubles as destroying the first gate, which is on your way to finally toppling Solaris. This fight earns an S. On the way to destroy the second gate, with the ricochet shot, we run into our familiar rivals, the Elements. We have Dominia and Calvina and their chosen gears, the Blade Gash and Marine Basher, versus Faye and Ellie in 2 back-to-back fights. I love how everything is playing out against the background, as if this octave operation is going off dynamically. The fights themselves are fairly basic. Domina's got a neat ability to absorb whatever element was just used and then unleash it back at you. But Calvina's the one that's the real problem here. She has a very powerful AoE attack, and a bit of patience and focusing everything on the Marine Basher makes this whole fight fairly easy, but still pretty memorable. Calvina can also heal, which is a bit of a problem, so gotta take her out. Simultaneously, we have Ellie and Faye being engaged. The rest of the group takes on the 2 elements Talon and Seraphita in the Grand Growl and the Sky Gene. Once again, the various pieces of Voltron look pretty good together, if a bit impractical. I mean, I definitely want the Sky Gene over the Marine Basher since, you know, it can fly. The fight is easier than the Dominion Calvina match, so from a gameplay perspective, it's pretty straightforward. Turn on a booster, lay on the damage. These guys stand no chance. Overall, between the 4 fights, I give the whole encounter that B+A range. Plenty of drama, but none of it's really super enhanced by the boss fights because they're not so difficult. But I think they're very memorable, have a good impact, and a lot of it has to do with the time pressure that's being felt. And I do like to point out that, of course, these gears are all designed by the doc. Again. So, the last team member and last gate to Solaris are blocked by the Crescents. This fight is honestly very straightforward. I like the design of the Crescents, but other than that, and the abomination of Rattan, the talking man fusion gear, very creepy. Our Beskar Emeralda is not putting up too much resistance here. She's gonna get a straight C. But even the gate destruction itself here is somewhat underwhelming. The boss is really just a placeholder to get your final party member. I mean, that said, I love Emeralda though. She's awesome, but I just felt like her intro here was a little bit understated. Probably because the real intro happened in that fight on the bridge. But that's an on-foot boss fight, so it'll be covered in a separate Xenogears tier list. And with that, we are finally on to Solaris. So, that is actually our last gear fight in Disc 1. But there are some other moments I'd like to touch upon before we head off into Disc 2. There's a really cool moment where the Zypzen needs to break through the barrier separating Solaris from regular reality. It's great to see Maria make her way back to Solaris for vengeance, but it's unfortunately one of the last significant things she does in the game. There's also a really touching moment with Ellie's father. Man, things are so rough in the Xenogears world. Ain't no love in the heart of the city. There ain't no love in the heart of town. Speaking of no love though, the unforgettable transformation scene where it is finally revealed and the subsequent destruction of Entronak are one of the most impactful moments of the game. I mean, super, super memorable. You just, not just this game, but really any of the video games, that scene stands head and shoulders above so many others. It's set up beautifully and executed in a tremendous way. I also love the follow-up encounter where Ellie, just minutes after losing both parents, her home and everything, goes out and confronts this monster. Even Doc doesn't know what to do at that time. Calling out with love and the well-timed Anemo shock, she breaks its hold over Faye and saves the Yggdrasil and probably everyone on it. Our last scene in this one is against the crazed, fully obsessed Ramses and his Omni-Gear. I love the setting of the gears flying through the sky. It's cinematic and beautiful. Now Ramses is completely drunk with his new power in the vendetta. So he attacks and defeats Faye for the second and last time. But it sets up brilliantly Disc 2. The incredible climax and conclusion of Xenogears Disc 1 is simply sublime. How the primary antagonist who had built up to fight Solaris has just been taken down, but both protagonists are separated from their allies, they've been shot down and critically injured. With that, it's on to Disc 2. This whole climax and scene's not really a gear boss battle, but I'm going to give this whole thing an S for just being incredible. And with that, guys, that's going to wrap up part 1 of 2 for the Xenogears Gear Boss Enemy Tier List. Originally, this was supposed to be 1 complete video, but it took an extreme toll on my computer to actually even do this. Loading all the footage together and collating everything, it was just taking... The video program was just crashing all the time, so we're going to split it up. So we got Disc 1, and then we'll see you guys hopefully very soon for Disc 2 and the final review on this one. I appreciate you guys watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. This took much longer than I thought it would, but in any case, hope you guys enjoyed it. If you made it this far, look out for the next video coming soon, and we will see you next time. See ya.